Thanks for having me. Yeah, any chance there is to talk about potatoes, I'm there. Yeah, so I've been growing potatoes from true potato seed since about the winter of 2016. I got some seed from my neighbor who got his seed from Tom Wagner, the guy who invented the zebra striped tomato. He also does a lot of stuff with true potato seed. And then I found Cultivariable. They're a great source and got a bunch of their different seed packages and have been having fun with growing potatoes since then. Yeah, I'm from Boise, Idaho. I went to Boise State University for horticulture technologies, applied science. I've been in Mendocino for about the last 9 years with my partner Lema and daughter Leela. We've been growing oyster mushrooms for small farmers markets for almost as long as we've been here, and gardening and farming in the Anderson Valley. We moved out to the coast about a year and a half ago, and that's when I started working with Ecology Action out of Willits. They also have a satellite garden here in Mendocino, and they are the grow biointensive, how to grow more vegetables people. So I'm working on learning and mastering their system, and it's really compatible with growing potatoes, also growing them from seed as well. So yeah, here's a little overview of what I want to talk about today. So yeah, I'm going to talk about why don't you just buy regular potato seed. We'll go over year 1, year 2, and year 3, and then I'll show you a quick seed processing example. I know everybody has different ways of understanding this process and doing it themselves, so this is just my experience here. So why don't you just buy seed tubers? I hear people say, it's so easy, you don't have to go through all that effort. For me, coming from a poorer background and also working with folks from third world or developing nations, I just love how accessible the seed is. It's very inexpensive to get started. Anyone can have access to seed anywhere on the planet. You can ship it in the mail much easier and cheaper than you could ship tubers. You can grow your own locally adapted varieties. I personally just really enjoy the variety that comes out of the experience every year. I try to grow from seed each year, but even if you don't, you still have your tubers from last year. So you're always deciding, do I want to plant seed this year or just keep growing out my tubers? You're always going to have seed berries, which is the exciting part. So no matter what you do, you have more seeds to work with, to hand out, to give to friends. And life is like a box of TPS berries. You never know what you're going to get. So in year 1, I prefer to start my seed in flats that are about 3 inches deep. You can get those pretty much at any gardening store. And what I'll do is I'll broadcast the seed into the flat. Usually I try to get about 1/8 of an inch spacing to 1/4 of an inch spacing between seeds. And those are going to germinate for me within maybe 15 days to 3 weeks. I'm out on the coast, so it's a little chilly. And then I'm going to prick out those little tiny baby plants, and I'm going to put them in a 4 to 6 inch deep flat or container, whichever one you choose. And then I'm going to bury them up to the top leaf tips when they reach that height. And the way I like to think about it is it's similar to the way how you treat tomatoes when you're growing tomatoes from seed. You'll get your little baby plants, and then some people like to up pot them a couple of times. It works really well with potatoes as well. You can get a nice little healthy plant, and when you bury it all the way up to those top leaves, you're getting that nice deep root system. Then after usually about a month and a half, or maybe even up to 2 months later, I'll take that 2 to 4 inch plant. 4 inches to 6 inches is really nice too, because then when you bury them, when you're transplanting into your final location in the field or your container, you get an even deeper root system. And so those first year plants have a lot of space now to grow out those original tubers that you're going to be selecting from. I like to space those plants about 6 to 9 inches. This is considered a pretty close spacing. In the biointensive method, we plant ours on 9-inch spacing, and we tend to get about 2 to 3 times the average US yield with that tight spacing. And this is where you're gonna start paying attention to your pests, your diseases. You're gonna start noticing different leaf shapes, different plant sizes. Some of them may be successful, and some of them might struggle and die out. So there's already a selection process happening here in year one. I like to let my plants finish out. My beds are about 3 to 4 feet wide, and I plant on hexagonal spacing. So I will let the plants finish out until they're dying back or browning. And at that point, it's holiday time, it's celebration time. You're going to dig your tubers up, and you're going to pay really close attention to where these tubers are forming under the plants. So the way that I select is I'm going to go with plants that don't have long runners, these underground rhizomes going in random opposite directions. I have found that if you replant those tubers, it just becomes a really big mess down in the root zone. And your potatoes are all going to be intermixed, and it gets really confusing. Also, if you're digging up those original tubers and you're finding that they're sprouting, you're not really going to want to keep those because they're going to be bitter, potentially, for one, and they're not going to store at all. So this is the fun part, is finding out which ones you want to keep. So are you looking for specific colors? Are you looking for specific shapes? I'm looking for basically that 1 to 8 ratio, where that one in the second year, the one tuber that I plant is going to have hopefully about 8 tubers. So you're looking for that 1 to 8. The idea of getting a high yield from that first year is a little subjective, but the way that I determine that is I compare it to the other plants in the bed. I like it when the tubers all stay right underneath the plant in kind of a circular bunch. I'd love to hear what other people are looking for, especially you, Julia. Do you want a bunch of little fingerlings? Do you want a bunch of small tubers? Or do you want a few large tubers? I tend to select for just the few large tubers. It's easier to replant. I can always cut my potatoes into multiple pieces and chit them out. But yeah, this is where you have fun. The fun part is you're going to do a taste test now, and just don't eat too many of those potatoes, because this first year you're just really feeling things out with those original plants that you are harvesting from. I don't know what other people's experience is, but I rarely have plants that has a much more sensitive, bitter sense. I don't know what you'd call that. She's just more sensitive to the bitter taste, so I let her choose which tubers we're going to keep or not. And yeah, you're going to find, depending on your seed stock, you're going to find just an incredible variety of different shapes and colors, whether the flesh is yellow or red or purple or white, and the outside you can have beautiful striping. So yeah, this is an example of the flats that I like to use. So the one on the picture on the left is just your standard greenhouse flat. There's some little potatoes coming up there, and I just carefully separate those out, and I will place them into the deeper 4-inch flat once they get 2 to 4 inches high. So the flat on the right, I build these flats. I just like the idea of we're doing our best to get away from plastic. That's always its own adventure and journey. So yeah, it's really easy to get a bunch of plants on hexagonal spacing in these flats. I appreciate what Joseph Lofthouse does, where he will broadcast seeds in the field. That has its own benefits. The reason that I am using flats is because I can save a lot of water and space in my growing beds. I'm on a really tight plant rotation with my gardening system. So I can grow these plants out in the flats for months at a time. And meanwhile, I have things going in my garden beds, whether that's salads, carrots, or beets, or things like that. And then I will plant these potato plants as a main season crop in my growing beds. So when you're heading into year two, after you've selected your tubers, I like to store them in basically like lunch bags, and then you can fold them up nicely, label them, try to keep your tubers separate, and then I'll put them in larger grocery paper sacks. You can use cardboard boxes if you want. I just try to limit how many of the tubers are touching each other, because if you have one that starts to rot and you have them all in the same container, it's likely that the other ones are going to rot too. So you're also really going to want to look through your tubers and see how they're behaving throughout that winter process, throughout the fall and the winter. So I like to look at them every month or a month and a half. And this is where you're going to find tubers that might start sprouting a little earlier than you would like. Around here, we're not going to be planting sprouted tubers in December or January. So I personally just try to avoid low dormancy tubers. And then I'm really interested in keeping the tubers that have the longest dormancy. We have rains here often until April. I'm still new to the coast. I could get tubers in the ground in the Anderson Valley about 50 miles west of here in March easily, maybe even late February, as long as we don't have any super heavy rains. But yeah, so I'm looking for those tubers that are going to sprout in March, April, May. So yeah, I like to do a really tight biointensive spacing. I get a really high yield, and I don't have to hill my tubers up at all. So I save a lot of labor. And I'm with 9 inches deep, 9 to 12 inches deep on 9-inch centers in hexagons in 3 to 4 foot wide beds. I'm getting a really nice little microclimate, and I can save a lot of water by planting with that configuration. And not having to hill up for me has been a big game changer. It's just much less work, and you still get comparable yields to if you were hilling up your potatoes. This is another point in the process where you're looking for certain characteristics. I feel like, from my experience, in the second year of planting potatoes on this 9-inch spacing is when I really see their true potential. This is where you're going to also be looking out for pests and disease, and you're going to see what size these plants can really get to. From my experience, these Tetroploid tubers that I'm saving seed from, they produce a lot more biomass than commercial potatoes, which can be nice for your compost pile. Yeah, the potatoes that take 3 to 4 months to really form tubers and then die back give me the highest yields. I think that's similar to commercial potatoes. I'm not an expert in this, but that's been my experience. And in year 1 and year 2, you're going to be getting your seed berries that, for me, those are little golden packages of joy. So I like to save those. I can save seed berries for, I don't know, I've saved them until they shrivel up into little tiny dry packages. I like to save them until I can get to them in around December, January, or February. Even if they start to rot, and even if they get flies in them, the seed is still going to be totally intact. So if you can put them in a place in a shed where that doesn't bother you, in a nice basket or something, that's just up to the individual if they want to deal with a stinking mess of potato seed berries. It doesn't bother me. I just like that I can get to it whenever past holidays or things like that. So yeah, the same thing. I'm going to harvest these when the top's brown and die back. And now is where you really get to do some taste testing and figure out the different qualities of your potato. Does it have a creamier consistency when you boil it? Does it make nice roasted potatoes. The things that you would look for in commercial varieties, you're going to see these same kinds of characteristics will appear in your potatoes that you're selecting from as well. So this is just a quick little photo. I like to plant my tubers, like I said, 9 to 12 inches deep on 9-inch spacing. So I will do a double digging process. That's a whole other animal, but it works really well for my situation and my setup. So that's just a little preview of what it looks like. I use the flags, and then when I'm moving the soil into the trench, my flags keep track of where my potatoes are so I can keep planting them on these hexagonal offset spacings. So in year 3, you are starting the process all over again. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. That's T.S. Eliot, a little cliche, but it works for potatoes. So yeah, you're going to save your seed, keep on growing new varieties. It's a really fun process. It's really rewarding and enriching. It's fun to share your new varieties with friends. And then those tubers that you're sharing, they haven't been selected away from growing seed berries. So anytime you give somebody one of these tubers, they can then embark on that same journey of growing out their seed berries. And I like to joke around with people that if you have just a few true potato seeds, that's essentially a civilization starter kit. So it's just a fun thing to say. So really quickly, the way that I will process my seed berries, I either will use a Vitamix, and you can really blend them quite a bit and really whip them up. And you'll see that when you dump them into a glass bowl, that all of those seeds from the seed berry, by the joy of physics, will float to the bottom, and all of the seed berry juice at the top, you can pour it off and then pour in more water from the tap. And then you can keep pouring off until a lot of the pulp and juice will rinse the potato seeds for you. And then at the end of that process, in the bottom of that glass basin will be your seeds left over. If you don't have a blender, you can do this by hand in a glass jar. You can just squish the seed berries. I use a potato masher as well. If you don't have electricity, or you're in a situation where you don't have access to that kind of technology, you can just squish them up in water, and the seeds will be released from the seed berry and the pulp, and they tend to sink to the bottom. So after your first year or two, you're going to be so rich in seed berries that even if you lose a few, it's fine. 1 ounce of seed berries is enough to plant up a small municipality's worth of potatoes. So they're really magical. So here's an image of the seeds floating to the bottom of the pulp. It's really cool how it works out like that. And yeah, here's a little picture of the potatoes that I've been saving. For some reason, the way that the epigenetics is working for me, my potatoes keep, even when I have a big mix of TPS variety seeds from cultivariable, they tend to go towards the purple. I don't know what's going on with that, but anyways, yeah, it's really fun and a super enjoyable process. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them now.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. And I do have a few questions. I wrote down about 20. But if anyone else wants to,
Cool, let's talk.
if someone else wants to raise their hand, then I will call on you. Just raise your hand and turn on your mic, or unmute yourself and turn on your video. So I don't see any questions. So just raise your hands and I'll keep an eye out, or feel free to put them in the chat and I'll read them to Matthew. Okay, so one thing that Matilda mentioned, so this is secondhand information that you do, and I didn't hear you mention it, is start seeds really early in the year and then let them sort of form microtubers in the pots before you transplant them, and then transplant those microtubers the same season. Is that something that you actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. I left it out because that's more of a tinkering kind of a thing. But yeah, if you have the indoor growing space or you have a greenhouse situation, you can get these things germinated basically any time of the year. And you can, in like a 4-inch pot, you can plant, get your seed going, and you'll get these little tiny tubers that then you can plant as early as you can in the season. But even with those little tiny tubers, I can still get full size yields later on in the year. So
So, what month
it's
would you plant the seeds in that scenario?
I would say January or December. So just make sure you have really good airflow because they will succumb to damping off.
Isn't there a dormancy period that you're facing when you even the microtubers?
Yeah, that's what I've seen from the seed is there's just a huge range of dormancy in those individual seeds. So if you plant some like directly in the soil, I've seen that you'll have them germinating at different times throughout the year. And the way I interpret that is just different levels of dormancy in the seed. I forgot to talk about how I dry the seed, and that
Yeah,
might
sure.
might decrease the dormancy. So I'll use when I separate all the seed from the seed berry, I will use an Excalibur drying rack and I just set it on the lowest setting on basically paper. You can use any kind of paper really. And I will dry that for until basically the seeds are cracker dry, you might say.
And that reduces their dormancy, that increases their germination speed? Or
I don't know if it does, but for me, yeah, I don't it because there's so many different sources of seed and it isn't really standardized. I guess we might say cultivariable or what you're doing is a standardization because you're doing the same things every year and making that same seed stock available. But yeah, I don't have an inhibited germination rate. So I
I
think it's
noticed
just from the
that
wide variety.
the seeds that I got from you indirectly germinated really quickly. So I was also curious about fermentation.
Hmm.
You didn't mention that in your presentation. And what do you say about fermentation?
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating thought because I will let my seed berries sit for sometimes up to 3 months. And that's something that I do wonder if it's not similar to tomatoes, where you're reducing that germination inhibitor. I don't know what that particular chemical is, but that could potentially be a factor because I'll let the seed berries sit until they're essentially rotting and they've got even flies buzzing about. I don't ever really see maggots eat them. I don't see rats or mice get into them. We have a lot of rodents in our area, so there's something that the animals don't really like about the seed tubers, the seed berries.
But
So
then once you're blending them up and squishing them up, you don't ferment them like people do with tomatoes before adding water and allowing the seeds to sink. Is that true?
no, I was just imagining that they were going through some kind of fermentation process in their own juices, so to speak.
So another question, can you say a bit more on your yield? You mentioned how it was subjective and you're looking for that 1 to 8 ratio, but can you say it in terms of pounds? What's a good yield for you in the first year the plant you're planting the true seed?
Yeah, if I plant on like a 6-inch spacing, I've tried to meticulously weigh them out, and it's on that really tight spacing. I usually don't get more than a pound per plant. It's in the second year when I go with a wider spacing. That's when I really see what I would call normal yields. If I plant one tuber that's, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, half a pound, then I'm going to get maybe 2 to 3, 4 pounds yield from my individual plants. And then you just have those outliers where you get a much higher yield and you get a few gigantic tubers and they weigh a few pounds just from 2 or 3 of them. So, yeah, I should probably keep better track of my yields. I get lost in the process and just excited about it all, and it's hard to keep data. Yeah.
And have you noticed how much diversity do you see? Say I don't know if you track this, but if you plant seeds from one that's pretty purple and you separate that as the mother plant and then plant a bunch of different plants from that same mother, how much diversity do you see in the second generation? Do you see pinks and yellows coming through, or do they stay pretty purple?
Yeah, so far I don't know if it's just my specific source of seed, the original mix that I got, but I will just it seems to be like a never-ending variety of diversity, a never-ending amount of colors. And even though the bulk of my potatoes seem to tend towards purple after these last many years, I still get white fleshed potatoes, yellow fleshed potatoes, purple, white fleshed with streaks of rose colors or streaks of reds, streaks of purple. It just seems like they say that I guess there's 48 chromosomes in these things. And so there's just so much variety and diversity that I haven't really taken the time to really see if I can do really intense selection on specific colors. And that's why I know Cultivariable, they sell packages where they will claim that their plants will tend towards one specific color or one specific characteristic, but then they also have a little disclaimer, if I remember right, that you're still going to have a big diversity of outcomes. So hopefully that answers your question.
And you mentioned you grow tetraploids. Can you explain the difference tetraploid and diploid and why or why not you don't grow diploids, or maybe you do, but tend towards more tetraploid?
Yeah, for me, that seemed to be. I started out with an equal mix of diploids and tetraploids, and I don't know if it's just what the kind of soil that I had or the temperatures, but it's probably why I let them all die back first before I harvest the full bed because I have them on really tight spacings. And so I think just from my cultural practices, I immediately selected away from the low dormancy diploids. I know they tend to have lower yields and a very low dormancy. I heard they taste really good though, that their taste rivals the tetraploid potatoes in variety. So yeah, I think it's just from my practices that I've tended away from the diploids.
Yeah, I've noticed that too,
Yeah.
that storage or yeah, storing over winter is pretty hard. I put them in the fridge and that seemed to work better for one, but
Oh, that's a good idea.
the it was how feasible do you think it would be to just grow to select for high yields in that first year and just grow from seed to seed every single year in the same way that we do with tomatoes? Why would or wouldn't you want to move that in that direction? Like never
Yeah,
storing any
I could say
tubers.
why I would.
Okay.
Yeah, I could say why I would and why I wouldn't. Why I would do that, why I would grow from seed every year is you just have incredible, vigorous plants. You can get a full yield in the first year growing from seed. It's just going to take, from my experience, an extra month and a half or 2 months of growing time. And just because of that, I have really tight crop rotations in my garden, so I'm trying to minimize the amount of time that I have a plant in the growing bed. So it's mainly just about management, really, for me. Like I try to have a mixture of growing from seed every year and growing from tubers. And that's just, I can just grow more potatoes in a tight rotation in my growing bed if I'm starting from tubers. But the really just the I don't know. For me, it feels like an insurance policy to always have new, fresh varieties that I'm growing from seed, and it's just plain fun just to see all the different things that come out of it. But it's totally possible to get a full yield in the first year. Yeah.
Yeah, I did the first year that I grew them, I got amazing yields. And that was the year that Joseph Lofthouse came to my farm and we got video footage. And I was like, I can just do this every year. But that was the only year that, in some cases, there were plants that would yield like 10 pounds per plant. They were big plants. They were,
Oh
you know,
wow.
my height, and just their root systems were huge. It's tons of potatoes. And I was like, oh, I have the perfect climate, the perfect whatever. But it was totally beginner's luck. So every year I'm trying to get back to more of that. And it's gophers and it's blight and it's just so few potatoes. So maybe this will be the lucky year. But yeah, I think that would be a benefit for the world to have a population that was just high yielding from seed every year. So how
Hmm.
many varieties do you have at this point?
I think I probably have about six right now, six different varieties. You can see in that picture that I showed a little preview of that. And they all are, just because of the way that I'm selecting them, they tend to all have about the same shape and similar yields per tuber piece. I try to have, when I cut my potatoes, I usually don't plant a full potato. Some people recommend that. I just cut them into basically like golf ball sized, as long as they have between 2 to 3 eyes per piece. So, yeah.
And your photo showed really a mixed population. You don't keep them separate when you're planting.
Yeah, when I plant them, I will plant them by the type that they are. I try to group them together, and that just makes it way easier to track when I'm digging them up. If you do choose to plant a big mix, that's just fine too, especially if you can count on them kind of finishing out at the same time. For me, most of my plants finish out between 3 and 4 months. So, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And I this is the first time I'd heard of someone planting in the way that you are without hilling or adding anything during the growing season. So that's something that you started doing on with this method, the combination of biointensive and growing from seed.
Yeah, for me it was I don't know what you'd say, a synchronicity of sorts, just the way that they plant them. And they also really emphasize starting things in flats, because then you're saving a lot of water by not watering a bunch of bare soil in the field. So that just, it all works together for me, the style of planting that I'm doing, starting them in flats, up potting, and then planting in the field. That's also what the grow biointensive method uses too. So it was just a synchronicity, and it's synergistic with that style of planting. And yeah, I last year I'm getting about 180 pounds per 100 square feet. So that's not really, that that doesn't help you out if you're growing by the acre or the quarter acre, or if you're growing in 200-foot long rows, because I'm growing in these little tiny blocks. But that is basically about 2 times the normal average US yield. So I'm satisfied with that, and not, I don't know if I did hill the potatoes up, if I could get a higher yield, that's possible. But it's just been working for me to do the tight spacing in the hexagonal blocks.
Yeah.
So that's why I keep doing it.
Okay, we
Yeah.
have Chip who has a question. You have to unmute yourself, Chip.
Can you speak more about planting? Do you use a greenhouse? Do you use heating mats? Similar to tomatoes, what type of germination rates do you get? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I'll say the media that I'm using is, I'm actually not using any potting soil or any like vermiculite or perlite. I'm using growing bed soil. So I use a mixture of 50% compost, 50% growing soil from the beds, and I will put it in a greenhouse that has the door open. We have really mild winters here. I don't know what it's like for you where you are, but my nighttime temperatures swing from, basically, when I'm planting them in March, April, or May, my nighttime temperatures are going down to the 40s. Daytime temperatures are 65. And I couldn't give you an exact germination percentage, because I'm not weighing my seed or counting my seed. I'm just broadcasting it in the flat. And I don't broadcast it so heavily that that the seeds are on top of each other, but I'm trying to get around a eighth of an inch, quarter inch spacing on those plants. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. I'm in zone 9A. Do you have any tips for me on how I can improve my germination rate? I just decided to plant a whole lot more, and like I said, I get about 20%. Reading the cultivariable site, it looks like 50% is normal. So maybe I'm doing it at the wrong temperature, or I'm overwatering or underwatering, or I don't know. Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, the way that I water is I will let the top just about start to dry out. And if I've only buried my seeds under an eighth of an inch of soil, it's a pretty risky thing if you go on a day trip and you forget to water and you come back. I might be getting my germination rate because I'm over sowing. And since I'm not weighing my seed, I don't know. If I were you, I might try more seed. It can be cost prohibitive depending on how much seed you want to buy. But I would say definitely don't give up. Those original plants that you grow out, when you get your own seeds and you get your own stock going, and then you can really start to play with those different broadcast rates. Yeah, definitely don't give up on it. And overwatering can certainly be a problem. That's where especially really cool temperatures, if it's going to be 30 or 40 degrees, low 40s, you're going to have a lot of damping off there. A lot of fungus will go through that. But I see that as also its own selection process, nature just helping you find out which of those potatoes are stronger for your individual environment and growing characteristics. Pretty much for me, every step of the way, there's a self-selection going on. There, you almost are just observing the process as it plays out. So just keep observing and definitely keep trying and don't give up. That's what I would say.
And do you have any tips for people who are growing in hotter climates? I know your climate's pretty mild, but you've lived in the Anderson Valley where there was a hotter summer. People struggle with getting
Yeah,
berry production.
yeah. That for me, I've noticed because I'm planting in these blocks, I'll notice that the plants on the edge, when I was in the Anderson Valley, the plants that were on the edge were definitely setting less seeds, less seed berries. And the plants near the center that were shading each other, where it was cooler and moister, they were getting more seed berries. You can use shade cloth. Another technique is just sowing, getting your plants in the ground as early as possible so that you're hopefully getting tubers before it gets too hot. Another way would be planting as late as you possibly can so that by the time you have your flowers forming, you're not having those 80, 90, 100-degree days, and hopefully your pollen is going to help set seed at that time. But yeah, with my really tight spacings, and the other thing I do too, that I forgot to mention, is I overhead water. So every day I'm watering overhead my plants. So I'm creating a really cool humid microclimate, and I think that might increase the ability to set seed berries as well. So much of it is a process of trial and error, and for your own particular growing environment.
Planting late is an interesting technique that I hadn't considered. Can you say more about that? Like when you would start your seeds in that scenario?
Yeah, and that brings up its own difficulty. You're going to need to find a really cool place to germinate your seeds. If you're not going to be in the Anderson Valley in June. If I was going to start some seed, I wouldn't be doing that outside, and I wouldn't be doing it in a greenhouse. So in that situation, I would try to do it in a really nice, cool environment somewhere in your house, or maybe somewhere in a concrete floor barn or something where it's really shady and cool. But yeah, I would start my seed in that situation. I've been successful starting it in May, mid-May, if I'm going to be planting my little plantlets late in the season.
Hmm.
So with your tubers, you can plant whenever you want, but you really got to think ahead if you're planting from seed.
Okay, there's someone with the raised hands. I can't pronounce the name there, but go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hello, Nathan here from North Carolina. Had a quick question is there any harm in growing, I guess, selected 4 varieties like russets, Yukon Gold, relatively close to seed started potatoes if you're wanting to save seeds? Is that pollination going to cause any issues?
I would say that isn't a problem. Every year that I've grown true potato seed, I usually also somewhere in the garden or even in the same plot will have commercial varieties. And that's just happenstance. Somebody has some extra tubers and they give them to me. I haven't seen any problems with that at all. And as far as I know, it would only increase the diversity of the seed that you would have. But I'm wondering what Julia thinks. Do you ever mix commercial varieties and true potato seed in the same area?
I have had them nearby, but yeah, you tend to grow ones that, you like. And so if they do cross, then that's okay. But yeah, you have to expect that there will be some crossing. And there's questions I have that I don't know the answer to about some that may be male sterile. And if they're obviously not producing pollen, but do you want to save berries from those ones? And I think yeah, I don't know if you have any opinions on that. Like, what about saving seeds from commercial varieties?
Yeah, we have grown out in the garden where I work with Ecology Action. There will occasionally be a variety of purple potatoes. I believe there were some German butterballs that were setting seed, and I haven't noticed anything strange with that. I can't say that I tend to actually just let all of my seed berries mix together. So I can't say that if I had saved those berries from the purple variety, I think it was a Bolivian purple or the German butterball, that I had any problems. And whether or right this is correct or incorrect scientifically, I just think about the seed berry. I think about them as all kind of on equal terms. That if you have seed that's successfully formed and they're inside this berry, they're all going to have such an incredible diverse array of characteristics that it almost seems a misnomer to think of them as different varieties, even if it comes from a commercial variety. So that's often, I hear a lot of stories from small farmers around here where they're like, oh, yeah, I saw those berries one time on this variety or that variety of potato. But they're like, there's this myth. I don't know if you've heard of this where, oh, you can't grow out potatoes from seed because they're just going to be bitter. It's just they're not going to taste good. And I think that comes from people who try to grow apple trees from seed, where you have this different expression where your apple might not taste very good or it won't be as sweet as the other apple. But it's very rare that I've had anything that was too bitter for my partner. I really don't have that bitter taste for some reason. Maybe it's because I'm from Idaho. I don't know. But I haven't I haven't tasted a potato that I've grown from seed that was just unpalatable. So I think there's a lot of myths being spread about whether or not it's intentional, just about how don't even mess with it. Is there a potato lobby somewhere telling people you shouldn't grow potatoes from seed?
Yeah, it's
I don't
so
know, but
common because they
it's
say
kind
that about squash too. And even apples, when you grow apples from seed, they are not all turning into crab apples. Well,
of, oh yeah.
thank you so much. If there are any other questions, now's your last chance. That was really interesting. I hope everyone's inspired to grow their potatoes, and it sounds like you can still start them. When would be the last date people should start their potato seeds?
Oh yeah. Depending on the length of your growing season, I probably wouldn't go any later than May. So I don't know what it's like to grow in the tropics, but yeah,
Okay, thank you,
definitely.
Matthew. And we'll look forward
Yeah.
to, I'll share your interview, and if you have any photos that you want to send with it, then we'll add those to the YouTube video. All right, thanks a lot. And
Awesome.
thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for
I'm
listening.
growing out some of your sweet corn and your flour corn from growing to seed. So I'll be reporting to you how that goes. Thank you so much for your
Okay,
time today.
good. All right, see you later, everybody. Thank you.